Hello and welcome. I'm Izzy at Minerva. We're going to be looking today at how to hack our very own Amelia Dress sewing pattern. This is the original pattern, and in today's video I'm going to talk you through how to make some alterations. These alterations consist of removing the sleeve and just adding a bit of a dropped shoulder sleeve effect onto the bodice. We're also going to raise the hem so that it's just above knee length, and then we're also going to change the gathers underneath the bust to create darts instead. So we're making three nice little changes which will make a big impact on how the dress looks aesthetically and give you a lot more options in terms of how you want to sew and style your Amelia dress. Now I'm going to be talking you through step by step how to make those changes using the pattern. So you're going to need the sewing pattern, which you can purchase from our website. You're also going to need suitable fabric and your standard pattern drafting tools. So all those tools are listed next to me here. Now, as you follow along today, I'm only going to be showing you how to change the pattern pieces, how to redraft them to make these changes, and then I will then show you how to sew the fabric for the steps that have altered and changed from the original instructions. If you need further support in terms of how to sew the original steps for the original pattern, you can obviously refer to the booklet, and we do have a lovely sew along available online as well on our YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel you will also find a fabric recommendations video which talks all about the best type of fabrics for this pattern. And you'll also find a fitting video which I've filmed which talks you through how to fit the original pattern so that it fits you really beautifully. So if you need extra help with your sewing project, then those resources are available for free on our YouTube channel. Before we start, I should mention what I'm wearing today, which is fabric available on our Minerva website. This is Mind the Maker fabric in sienna. This is our double-faced sweater knit fabric. It's really lovely to sew with. It's got a tiny bit of stretch, and it's just a really lovely colour. This is a self-drafted jumper. Don't forget as well that we have got a pattern drafting video series available for you to watch where you can learn how to draft your own patterns as well. We're going to start off this video very gently, and we're just very simply going to raise the hem of the dress. Let's do that together. Okay, let's get straight on into it. This is our Amelia dress sewing pattern. This is pattern piece F, which is the front skirt, and we're going to raise up the hem. Now, we have a couple of guides on the pattern piece. So this is the waist notch and this is the hip notch. Now you are going to want to measure on your body where you want your hemline to be using the waist or the hip as a nice reference. I'd probably recommend the waist. So grab a tape measure, measure from your waist down to just above your knee and see where that length sits on you. Now for me, that length is about 60 centimetres. For you, it will be something different, and that's absolutely fine. Great, so working from the approximate waist level notch, which for me is here, and obviously you've cut out your size, just mark a point that is the length that you need plus 1.5 centimetres for your hem allowance. So for me, that would be 61.5 centimetres in total. Now, working with the ruler, measure the distance from the hem up to see how much you're going to be cutting off. For me, it's 15 centimetres. Continue to mark 15 centimetres offset from the hem all the way around the hem. Okay, then once you've done that, just join that with a nice neat line all the way across. And just make sure when you hit the centre front, which is here, that your line is exactly perpendicular to the centre front line. Otherwise you're going to get a bit of a funny drop. Next, cut along that line. Brilliant. And that is your front skirt pattern piece done. Okay, moving on to the back skirt pattern piece. We just want to repeat the same process, raising the hem up by 15 centimetres. Don't forget, for you it might be something slightly different depending on your body measurements. And I'll take your pattern piece with that line that is 15 centimetres above the hemline and then cut along that line. Excellent. And now that's done. Brilliant. Let's move on to look at the top pattern pieces now. Okay, so on the table now we've got the pattern piece B, which is our front bodice, and D, which is the back bodice, and we're going to look at the shoulder changes first. Very simply, we're just going to extend out the shoulder seam by 3 centimetres. So draw a straight line continued out from the shoulder seam like that. Now, don't forget that we've got a seam allowance here all the way around this particular pattern piece. Do the same on the other side. Then what you basically want to do is kind of draw in the curve of the cap. What I'm going to try and do is join it from here down to where this notch is, so the arm site underneath like stays the same, but we have a nice soft curve coming in from up there that just feels like really nice and comfortable. So something like this. Lovely. And then the same on the other side. Cut those pattern pieces out. Now we've made those changes to the shoulder seams, which is wonderful, but we now have to deal with the fact that we've removed the sleeve. We're not going to use the sleeve pattern piece, but we still need to finish off the seams of our lovely sort of extended dropped shoulders. What I'm going to suggest here is that we actually just create a little simple strip of bias binding, which we can then finish off those beautiful dropped sleeves with. So let's do that now. Working on the front pattern piece, annotate where your stitch line is, or where your seam allowance is, which is 1.5 centimetres offset around the entire arm side. Repeat for the back pattern piece. Just worth marking the seam allowance along the top of the shoulder as well. And of course down the side seam. Using a tape measure, measure the length of the stitch line from the seam allowance at the shoulder seam all the way down to the side seam, following that stitch line that you've just marked out. Make a little note of that. For me it's 25.5 centimetres, and then repeat for the front. Okay, so now we basically know the length of our bias binding that we need to create. Grab your calculator, tap in the length of your back, and then add the length of your front. And that is the length of the bias binding that we need to create. Grabbing a new piece of paper, draw a line that is that long. So for me, 49.5 centimetres. Square up by 4.5 centimetres. And then complete the rectangle. We now have a beautiful little bias binding strip which is ready to go, but don't forget it needs to overlap at one point, and because that's the exact length that we need, but we're going to need to add like a little seam allowance so it can overlap as we sew it together. So add in an extra 1.5 centimetres to either end of the bias binding, just to give you a little bit of flexibility as you sew it. Excellent, and then just annotate your pattern piece. Don't forget that on bias binding, the grain line is obviously on a diagonal, so it's not straight down or parallel with any edge. This is the grain line here. Excellent, and there's that pattern piece now completed. Okay, let's move on to look at removing the gathers from underneath the bust and creating a dart, and that's the final pattern drafting alteration we're going to be making. At this point, go and grab your front skirt pattern piece and just lay it next to your front bodice pattern piece. What we're trying to ascertain is what the difference is between this section here where we're gathering and this section here. So let's take a look at that. First of all, draw your seam line on the pattern piece. Next, extend those darts down to your stitch line. What we're trying to do is just make sure the ruler is running perpendicular to the top, so it's a nice straight line like that. And the same here, just make sure that you're lining up with the correct notch down at the bottom. Measure the length of the skirt between the notches. For me, it's 7 centimetres. It should be the same for everyone actually, shouldn't it? Okay, and then measure the distance between these two notches along the stitch line again. And for me, it's 12 centimetres. For everyone, it will be something different. Grab your calculator, tap in the bodice length and then minus the skirt length. So the bodice has an extra 5 centimetres of volume in it here compared to here. So we need to remove 5 centimetres from the top in order for the length of this stitch line here to be the same length as that, so that it's going to match up and sew beautifully together. Okay, next, grab your ruler and line it up with the centre front. And then where this dart is here, just draw a nice strong dashed line straight across the pattern piece. This is our bust line, or approximate bust line location. Okay, brilliant. Next, mark the midway point between the gathers here, and then just square up to your bust line. For me, I needed to remove 5 centimetres in total. So now I'm just going to very simply create a dart that is 5 centimetres width at the bottom of the bodice top. So I'm going to tap in 5 into my calculator, that's the distance I need to remove, divide it by 2 and I get 2.5. I'm going to offset a line 2.5 from either side of this centre bit here on that stitch line, and then I'm going to mark a point 3 centimetres below this bust line here, at that point there, along that line. Now then, join those lines up together and extend it all the way down. And that is our bust dart. Once we've sewn that together, the length of this and this will match up perfectly with the length of this. Now, just so you can understand in a little bit more detail, the reason why we've dropped the dart down from the bust level is simply because it's a more elegant solution to creating a dart. We don't want the dart to come right up to our apex. We do just want it to curve around the fullest part of our bust. So that's why we've dropped it 3 centimetres. Brilliant. Okay, so we've made all those changes now to the pattern pieces. Let's go and cut them out. I'm going to use this stunning fabric behind me, which is our gorgeous Minerva own brand fabric. It's going to look stunning in this and I can't wait to sew it up. Let's go. So in this video, I'm using our Minerva Exclusive Petal Eclipse viscose challis fabric. And it's absolutely gorgeous. The colour is so vibrant and fun. It's going to be gorgeous for a summer dress. So what we've done here is I've already completed step 1, which is just prepping all the neckline and the facing. I've then basically done steps 2 all the way through to putting the zip in place. So all the way through to step 7. And so as you can see, the back of the dress is now completely sewn up together. I've done the darts and I've also put the invisible zip into the top, so into the back. So that's all been done. Now, before we then attach the shoulder seams up at the top up here, I'm actually going to prep my darts on my pattern piece first, because I want to do that first before I then kind of deal with everything else. So at this point here, once you got to step 7, let's go and prep the front pattern piece. So this was our pattern piece, and remember we've got a nice little dart here, so we're going to prep that dart now on both sides. So I've marked with a fabric pen where the location of the dart is, so you can see it's just quite a dashed line. It's a little guide really, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pinch the fabric together and I'm just going to locate where the top of the dart is with a perpendicular pin like that, and then I'm just going to pop a few pins in and just check that the pin is aligning with the line on the back as well as the line on the front where the dart stitch line should be. That's looking pretty good. So one on one side and then just repeat that process for the other side as well. Okay, we're now going to sew those darts from the bottom up to the top of the point. We're going to start with our standard stitch length at the bottom, and then as we get to about 2 or 3 centimetres away from the top, we're gradually going to start to reduce the stitch length so that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and more fine as it hits the end. And then we're just going to sew off the point and then tie a little knot at the end to tie those threads together. Excellent, so they're both now sewn, those 2 little darts, and what we're going to do now is we're actually going to push the darts towards the side seam and then just press them in place, and that step is then complete. Moving on then, follow the steps where we attach the shoulder seams at the front onto the back, prep the facing and attach the facing just as usual using a standard method all the way through to step 13, and at step 13 I'll drop back in again and just show you how we're going to attach the front to the skirt. Okay, so I've sewn up to step 13. And I've got my front now attached to my back. I've also attached the facing and understitched that. And now what we're going to do is attach the skirt. Now obviously in the original sewing instructions it says to gather, but we have just done a dart instead right here. So all we need to do is just really simply line up the seam allowance and it should line up beautifully. We do have our original notches here and here, and they should also line up, and same on the other side, with the skirt notches. So grab your front skirt pattern piece and just start to pin it in place. It's always a good idea to start to pin in the middle and then pin the side seams for something like this, because then you can sort of ease in any fabric that needs to be eased in, and it just ensures that you get a nice even finish. Yeah, that's looking really good. The notches are lining up beautifully, so pin those notches first. And just make sure when you're pinning it that the dart, which you've pressed towards the side seam, remains like pressed towards the side seam. So I'm just going to pop a pin in that dart just to make sure when I sew it, it's actually definitely going to sew in that direction. Okay, so once you've pinned one half, then just pin the other half. Okay, excellent. And then just sew that using a standard seam allowance and finish it. Pretty much exactly the same as the original instructions. Wonderful, so there we go, that's all been sewn, that whole seam has been finished. So we've now basically done step 14. We can move on and continue to sew step 15 exactly as it says by sewing the side seams together, and then we are going to ignore these steps about sleeves because obviously we've not got sleeves that we're going to add in, but instead we're going to do the bias binding. So come back and join me once you've sewn those two side seams together. Okay, so on the screen in front of us here, I've got the back of the dress facing up on the screen. The whole thing is actually sewn together now down the side seams, and I've got my bias binding strip here, which I'm going to attach into the arm side here. I have just folded back and pressed one short end of the bias binding by just about 1/2 centimetre, and that's going to give us a nice neat finish in a few minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together, and starting on the back, doesn't really matter wherever you want, we're going to just start to pin this binding in place all the way around, lining up the raw edges. Wonderful, so there we have it. It's all been pinned in place all the way around, and at this point where it hits the beginning of the bias binding, just let it overlap a little bit, and you can just trim that down slightly if you want to. Okay, we're now going to sew those two together using a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Next, trim down the seam allowance so that it's half the width, so 7 millimetres. Okay, so to start off with, just press that seam allowance up towards the bias binding all the way around the sleeve. That's going to give you a nice crisp finish. Excellent, so on the inside now it's looking really nice and crisp, which is exactly what we want. Okay, next, I'm going to put that back in there again. So then we're going to get the bias binding and we're going to turn it over so that it matches up with the stitch line in this particular scenario. And just press that all the way around nice and neatly. Excellent, so we've got that all beautifully pressed over now to the stitch line. And now we're going to do one final press, which is that we're then going to turn and flip the whole of the bias binding so that it touches and is folded all the way over to the bodice, and then we're going to press that in place, making sure that we're sort of just rolling the bias binding slightly further around the arm side so that we've got the top showing just a little, like 1 millimetre where that crease is, where the seam allowance is. We've just got it rolled over a little bit further in so that we've got a smooth finish on the outside. So just press that in place and pin it as you go. Okay, wonderful. Once you've pinned around the entire perimeter, we're then just going to stitch it, and we're going to stitch it reasonably close, just 2 or 3 millimeters away from the folded edge. So let's go and do that now, and then that's going to give us a beautiful finish. Okay, and there we have it, beautifully finished on one side and the same on the other, all the way around. It's giving us a really nice consistent finish. So do the same for the other sleeve, and then all we need to do is hem it, and then it's done. Okay, so here is our beautiful dress that we've redrafted with those lovely little dropped shoulders, with the lovely bias binding finishing, and also the darts and a raised hem, looking stunning. This is just a lovely simple transformation that makes a big impact on how the dress looks. I do hope you found that really fun, that you've really enjoyed the whole process of drafting that with me and sewing it together. And don't forget, we have got a few other videos for you available to watch, all about how to hack the Amelia dress sewing pattern. So if you enjoyed this, do take a look at our playlist, which shows you all the fun different alterations you can make. So thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva, and I'll see you next time.